Hello everyone, welcome to Six Senses Night School live on air this evening, and tonight we're talking about some local church projects. I've got two people in the conference with me. One is Christine Baker from Trinity-at-waiake Church in Auckland, and the other are Dorothy and Ernest Willis from the Riverton Union Parish. And I thought it would be nice, Dorothy and Ernest haven't met Christine and vice versa, so I thought it'd be nice if both of them gave a bit of a brief introduction about themselves and what their background is. And so over to you, Christine. Tell us something about your background.
Thank you, David. I thought that I'd share something about East Coast Bays first, how we opted to go into local shared ministry about 6 years ago. So during a calling process, I was identified by the congregation to come on to the ministry support team with the responsibility of convener of outreach. I'd recently retired from teaching, where I was involved 26 years at a local East Coast Bays primary school. Now, most schools on the shore are rated as decile 10, so it's the perception everywhere that these schools are very well off. But in fact, that is not so. There are quite a number of families that struggle with day-to-day expenses, and for their children to actually play a sport is way beyond their means. So that's really how our initiative, Caring for Our Children, was developed. That's the background.
Well, that's great. That tells us, you know, you come from the educational sector, and so you've got a particular interest in this. So Dorothy and Ernest, you too have some things to share about yourselves from the Riverton Union Parish perspective.
Yeah, well, I've got an education background too, but slightly different in that I'm 28 years school secretary, but in rural places you tend to find your strengths in other areas of use. So over those years, my strengths in both music and technology have been well used by the schools. So I'm now retired as well, and we've been in local shared ministry for 9 or 10 years, I think. So we've had to find our way too, and how we were best going to serve our local community in Riverton.
And Ernest?
In the church, and it's sort of like another job almost, if we can put it that way. But having come into a union parish and find ourselves we can't support full-time ministry, you begin to look not just at your own resources, but really what is our purpose and what can we actually do for the kingdom of God in our place. And I think that's what has brought us to the point where we're looking at what we can do for children who are not within our church family, within our worshipping church family. We're an older congregation, and even if we do not succeed in bringing young people in back to the church, we'll at least hopefully sow in some seeds for the future.
Right. Ernest, we just lost sound just for a second at the start of what you said. Did you mention the fact that you had been a Boys Brigade chaplain for a long time?
No, I overlooked that. Yeah, I was a Boys Brigade company. That opened, yeah, that was a very interesting time, dealing specifically with boys who really looked up to their leaders for a male role.
Right. Okay, well, what I'd like to do is bring up our slides for the evening, and we're going to talk about each of these parishes in turn. So I'm just now highlighting the Trinity-at-Waiake initiative caring for our children. Christine, would you like to walk us through that slide? And if there are people who are watching live, you can try to, if you look at your screen in the sort of upper, I think it'll be your upper right, you can toggle our live Q&A chat pod on and ask us questions or make comments as we're going through. So Christine, over to you, caring for our children.
Thank you, David. Initially, our aim was to cover all the costs so that children that were identified by a primary school, that was a local primary school, they were able to participate in a chosen sport or activity. And also part of our initiative was that we supported the learning of children within their classrooms by regularly hearing them read. We see sport as providing an opportunity for children who, for a number of reasons, experience difficulties socially and with their classroom learning. Sport does enable them to experience what it means to be part of a team. So we very much needed to hear back from teachers who gave the names of children to the principal who they thought would benefit very much from playing sport, and they knew that their caregiver was unable to cover the fees and the uniform costs.
So I see on the slide, Christine, that you've managed to fundraise from the local congregation, and just walk us through that list of bullet points. What have you actually paid for since the project began?
Yes, we paid for a 10-year-old who was really, really passionate about playing rugby. There was no way that funding from any other sources could come through to enable him to undertake that. He had excellent ball skills. He had some learning difficulties in the classroom and socially. We funded him for 2 seasons to play rugby, and as a result, he was happier at school, and he even began to get some really good results. He was one of the first to give positive feedback to team players and the opposing team. So all around, it certainly helped that 10-year-old. We have also supported a couple of girls very young girls into netball, and brother into judo. Now, we haven't heard, I am unaware of any feedback from that. Also, I'll just stop for a moment, because that's really all we have been involved with as far as sport. The whole thing has now developed into a wider sphere, actually.
So walk us through how that's sort of expanded out. I'm looking here and seeing even a basic school uniform paid for.
Yes, that was paid for the 10-year-old who left primary school, and there was no way that a uniform was going to come through government sources. So we were approached. We paid for a basic uniform. He was the rugby player. And so we've let the family know that that is where our funding probably stops as far as for a uniform. From now on, they would need to be looking at second-hand replacements.
Okay. What do you mean when you're talking about school fees paid for a family? Do you mean the donation that's expected? I suppose it is a fee, but technically it's a donation. Is that right, Dorothy?
Yes, it's technically a donation.
Right.
No, that wasn't the school donation. That
right.
was after school care. So at primary schools these days, they have before school care and after school care. The after school care runs till about 6 o'clock. And at most of those after school cares, they are actually on the school premises. And the children usually have time to do their homework. So we were approached to help a family who the dad was in hospital, terribly ill, and he was probably not going to be coming out for quite a number of months, which is what did occur. Now, this created for the family was not just a financial stress, but it was also pretty much psychological stress for Mum. She had difficulty getting her children, for one thing, to do their homework. So the school approached us to see if we could help them not only to have the children at the after school care for a couple of days a week, which enabled her to have the freedom to having prolonged times up at the hospital with her husband, but also knowing that when they arrived home, homework was going to be all completed. Now that went on for a good part of last year. Went and visited her at the end of the year, and she had a most wonderful story to tell us. The children were achieving fantastic results in their classroom. It just took all the stress away from her. The dad had arrived, had come back home. She also had been able to, in her spare time, look at setting up a private business. And so she was able to say, thank you for the care you've given me. And she's now able to employ a couple of part-time people.
That's a really great story. So, Christine and Ernest and Dorothy, I'm just going to invite Susan David and also Elizabeth Davies into the meeting. So it's possible we may get joined in this by some others. So I'll just bear with me 1 second while I just get these names sent an invitation. So at least Susan, I've managed to send an invitation off to you. Elizabeth, I'm not sure about. So if you come into this film strip running along the bottom, you're no longer watching from the audience as a viewer participation. You're actually participating in the dialogue. That's because Barbara Moller has a computer difficulty tonight, so I thought we'd just invite a couple more in. So we'll see whether they come in. So the last thing I'd like to talk about on your slide there at this point, Christine, is you purchased a Christmas hamper for a family, a struggling family, and an iPad. I mean, this is quite an eye-catching bullet point. An iPad purchased for a 6-year-old recovering from cancer. Yes. That wouldn't have been in your original thoughts, I would imagine.
No, not at all. You can see how everything has changed completely from being involved with paying for children so they can get into sport. The Christmas hamper, by the way, was the family that I talked about before with the after-school fees. Now, the iPad is just very recent, like within the last week. I was asked to go and meet Mum and give it to the little 6-year-old. And the story behind that, I've just got some notes here because I wanted to get all my information correct. So the wee 6-year-old boy, he was diagnosed with kidney cancer at the age of 18 months. He was given a transplant, but he continues to have major ongoing health issues, and he struggles very much with his learning. He receives some funding from the Ministry of Education and the charity Kidney Kids. This helps to fund a teacher aide, but he continues to have lots of absences from school because of the health issues. Now, his mum actually approached the school to see if there was funding that could be available through government sources to fund an iPad which would be used at home with the education apps that the school puts on it. The school was not successful applying for further funding for him, so that's when they approached us. And he knew exactly what to do with that iPad when I handed him the box. And that was last Monday. There is actually one other thing that is missed out as a bullet point, and it's a pretty important one. We go into the school with 12 volunteers to help on a weekly basis, reading programs. So the children read to our volunteers, and the result of this is that teachers trust the volunteers. They are aware that we are members of the local Methodist Church. Our help is publicly acknowledged during the school's end of year function that they hold to thank all volunteers that go into the school, and there would be at least 120 attending that function, and we are, part of that. So really, that's our caring for our children.
That's quite a mighty program. Any comments from Dorothy and Ernest about that?
Oh, it's great that you've got flexibility to be able to meet need as it comes along. I think that's the real secret to your ongoing success. You've got the flexibility to just go up and meet that need should it arise, and that's fantastic.
And
sorry, Christine, you go for it.
Having the trust of the local school, they are the ones that know where the need is, and we trust them completely to pass on to us where government funding is not available. So in the future, we're now looking at broadening this and going and actually approaching other schools that are in our community.
I mean, I think it's a fantastic initiative for a congregation to undertake, to become far more closely involved with the educational needs and the social needs of children sort of in the local area. And possibly the biggest sign of congregational engagement, Christine, is the fact that you've got, is it 10 or a dozen people going and attending, as you said, the reading programs? Yes. That, I think you're the biggest group that show up. You're bigger than the parents, aren't you? Size-wise.
Yes. Yeah.
Just a practical question, Christine. Do all your volunteer police vetted?
Oh, yes.
To be able to go into
the school pays for the police vetting.
Oh, right. So it's not a cost on the local church community, no, because it's to do with any volunteers at all.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's really great, and I'm just going to bring up the PDF again. And I have sent an invitation, Elizabeth Davies, through your normal email. You should get a link that you can click that would bring you in. And Susan Davids, I've sent you an invitation that should show up in your Google Plus notifications. So if you come in, that will be great. Otherwise, you're just sitting there. We've got one viewer sitting out there at present, but both of you had indicated an interest. So we'll now move over to a look at what Riverton Parish is doing with its Kids Pack. Dorothy, would you like to talk us through your slide, please?
No, I'm going to give it to Ernest to do, David, because it's his idea.
Right, you're in the hot seat, Ernest.
It sounds like I am in the hot seat, David. It's an idea that generated from the fact that we only have one family have any kids coming to our church. And of the people in the congregation, the grandparents, you might say, they've all got family round about who have family themselves. And so the idea was, how do we make contact with kids that we don't meet in any way whatsoever? And I thought of this idea that we go to them, and we're going to do it on a monthly basis by sending them a pack for just one Sunday a month. If this is a success after a trial of 3 months, we may step it up to every fortnight, because the more that we send out, the bigger the workload it is for people to create that generate enough interest for young children to want to do the activities.
Ernest, how many children are you have you now sort of got in your sights for giving packs to?
About 10 children at this stage. Are all involved around 5 families that we're going to trial this with and see how it goes. They're across the whole range of ages from 3 to 10. Section of how they see it and whether it's explained enough for them, or is it too churchy language, or is it maybe the parents might say it's too secular. But we're very open to feedback, because I think that will be the success of how we present it in the future.
Right. Ernest, can I'm just going to stop sharing that slide for a moment, and we're going to just share what you actually give out. Here we go. So what you should be able to see up on your screens now is a Google Plus page by Dorothy Willis, Riverton Union Parish Families. And as I look at that page, I can see that it's got a Jigsaw planet. It's got Wordle clouds. It's got some fun ways of doing things. So you can post in pictures that they make jigsaws with. You can get them to create Wordle clouds, which I think is, very much a fascinating activity for kids. You can get some beautiful results off Wordles. Dorothy and Ernest, one of you would like to explain what are you going to do with this particular page? Because you had mentioned safety, security for children online, Dorothy.
Yes, well, we figured that sending things home for children just to do on paper, like search a word and things like that, wasn't going to be complete enough in line with the way kids today like to do things. There needed to be technology components available to children who wanted to do some things with technology. So this page at the moment has been put up there as a test page just for me to learn how to work Google Plus, and I made it public. But when we put the one up for the families to go in and use, we will make that page private to keep the children safe. So it'll just be the children and their families who the page. But I needed to be able to put something up there to show our worship team that we work with and within the local shared ministry scene for them to see the vision that we are trying to create here. So there's tweaking to happen yet, and all's going to be ready to go out in the next week.
Well, I personally think it's a fantastic concept that you've come up with. The pack itself, Ernest, you're giving them a little memory stick, aren't you? A little that's got things like PowerPoints and the jigsaws and so on it. Is that right?
Yes, it's going to be a combination. There's going to be things to do off the memory stick, and there's also going to be some printed out things as well, because we were aware of the fact that if we put everything on a memory stick, if kids want to print it out to keep it, or something to do, join the dots, or a straight colouring in for a small child, we didn't want the parents having to use their printer ink to print the paper out. So what we're trying to do is incorporate absolutely every modality we can think of to put in for the different ages, and with as many options as they might like to try.
I mean, that's really thinking your way very carefully through the creation of the resource so that no one's disadvantaged. Yeah, I mean, it's a tremendous cost of printer ink, isn't it? If you put out a couple of full pages of colour, your cartridges have gone down straight away. It alerts me to the fact that within the Six Senses community, we've got fantastic resources that possibly we should be trying to create a pool of resources that are applicable to younger age groups. And Dorothy's and Ernest's kids pack got me thinking at Waiake, and I'd just like to draw your attention to the hot tip for kids in church, because I think one of the key things, I've just gone back to the Trinity-at-waiake page, that anyone asked the kids if they had a smartphone in church. Now, smartphones are sometimes the bane of people's lives, but I'd be very surprised if the majority of children, by the time they're 9 or 10, aren't carrying a smartphone. Have you got any statistics that would confirm or deny that, either Christine or Dorothy and Ernest?
No, I haven't got anything statistically that could confirm or deny that.
How about you, Christine?
No, certainly not at primary school age, but I would think certainly intermediate and obviously onwards.
And onwards, right. So if there were, I was introduced to kids and smartphones in the Waiake congregation because I was sitting in the congregation one day and saw a mother sort of saying to her two sons, hey, put the smartphones away, but they didn't want to do that. They were busily engrossed in whatever it was they were playing, Angry Birds or something. And it's when we start to put the pack together that I realized that like a 6-year-old with an iPad recovering from cancer through to healthy children, maybe congregations have to actually have the resource of some cheap tablets in church, so that when a child comes into church, they have a tablet. I mean, you can buy tablets now for $80, you know, basically ones that are thought to be out of date. And if you had a supply of 10 tablets in church, you could preload the resources on. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken to 2 sets of, in fact, they're all boys, but 2 sets of brothers whose ages would range from 8 to 12, and they all play this game of Minecraft. I've spoken to 2 young adult men, aged 20, and and 21, and they both play the game of Minecraft, and they're all convinced that they could put together a way of putting a Minecraft game for kids in church that would start to look at doing certain sorts of gospel-orientated projects. Now, I've tried to play the game of Minecraft, and I've come an absolute, it's sort of, I'm not going to say it's beyond me, but it's something that, a child would enter into. So I'm beginning to think that what we need to do is to assess where all our children in church are with technology, and also to try to establish with them, this is just going over to the Riverton slide, to ask what they like doing best outside of school time. For example, it would be no point whatsoever in giving a child a tablet in church and asking them to play Minecraft if they weren't in the least bit interested in Minecraft. It seems to me that somehow or other for kids in church we have to structure things around the kids' interest. Do you have any comments on that from either Christine or Dorothy and Ernest?
Yeah, I think we've got to tailor-make it with huge options so that, because we can't presume that they're all going to be interested in the same thing. Now, Ernest might be able to tell you about the experiment he did in church some months back to try and sell the idea to the congregation. He'll tell you very briefly. And I was quite gobsmacked because most of the adults in the families that we had set up couldn't handle a search word. So,
I planned the service around putting 6 people into a family, and when they formed their family, they had to pick a mum and dad, and someone had to become a preschooler, and someone had to become a teenager, and there were 2 other age groups that they had to pick people for. And
you gave them packs.
Yeah, I gave them a pack, and they had to work their way through that pack by reading first of all the page of instructions. And one of them was they had to name the mother-in-law of, I think it was Simon, on that day. So they had a group activity to do, and then they had to work out who they were, whether they were mum or dad, or whether they were the teenager. And according to the choice that they made there was the activity that they then had to do. And as Dorothy said, the searcher word, the older people could not handle that. And we found that very interesting.
Yeah, that's another entire area that we need to think very carefully about, particularly in local shared ministry. What are the assumptions that we make not only about children in congregations but about adults in congregations? It's always been a factor that I think is neglected. When the church moved to a much more liturgical style of worship in the 60s and 70s, there was just an inbuilt assumption that everyone could read. Whereas it's been my experience in congregations that there have been, not a lot, but always a proportion of adults that had never learned how to read. And so in precisely the same way that we've got adults going into primary schools in Christine's programs, the church helping with literacy, sometimes I wonder whether we should also target the people in our congregations who may need help with reading as well. And so I think your experiment, Ernest, just sort of starts to unpack a number of areas where it doesn't matter whether we're local shared ministry perhaps or whether we've got clergy perhaps. In all instances we may make too many assumptions about where our congregation is as a whole. I mean, there'll be lots of people who spend their life reading books and so on, but there will be a proportion who don't pick up their information how to live by reading. And actually, that's one of the things that I think is a big advantage in today's IT age, that there's a much more emphasis on learning with watching, with video, with graphics and images. And that's something that I think could really start to have an impact. Christine, do you have any comments about Ernest's experiment? Have you come across anything like that with congregations?
No, I haven't actually, but within a 5-year-old classroom, the confidence within children who will pick up for the first time a tablet and find their way around it really does amaze me, because adults don't like to press keys in case they do something wrong, but of course children are only too eager to try it all out, and of course you can't actually break anything. But you know, the older ones in our congregation, they're really quite scared to actually give it a go, unless they do break something.
It's been interesting for us too. It's a huge learning curve for us, because basically we sat down about 3 weeks ago and built the first bit aside, because this one's going out at the beginning of October. And Ernest got it out this week because we now need to work on it and finalise it, and putting it away and actually bringing it back out and looking at it with fresh eyes. He's been flat out changing things, because the first thing that hit him when he looked at it again was we had too much, probably religious language in it. And so quite a few of the words are being changed as we now go through it again, with that final look of, now the children are doing this, and okay, they'll have help from adults if they ask for it or want it, but on the whole it's got to stand on its own 2 feet for that child to pretty much manage. And we have to be careful that the language we use is a language that they understand.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that, Dorothy. We're all caught in the same trap here, that 50 years ago, the language that the church used was by and large well understood by the wider community. They may not have agreed with it, but they understood the language. What we've seen since the 1970s and 80s is an explosion of different cultures, languages, ethnicities within the New Zealand context, and we can't make assumptions that even those that have a history in this land have any longer the ability to speak the language of the church. And so I think Ernest is very much on the right track and sort of trying to figure out, how do we get the same concept across but without using the churchy language? And we had a fascinating live on air a few weeks ago with using movies as a form of Christian communication. And Stuart McAdam that did that with me. We're doing it again next week, the week after, with Stuart and a young filmmaker, Matthew Mawkes from Wellington. He is the parish administrator for Wesley Wellington for many years. And he's made 3 films, and he's hoping to sort of, I think, direct or produce a few more. And the idea that we could somehow use the film to convey some of the great messages of the gospel without actually overlaying it with the churchy language. Because, I mean, Jesus didn't use a churchy language. When he walked around, he looked at the flowers and he spoke about the flowers in the field. He looked at the money and he pulled out a coin. You know, it's very direct. It's very straightforward language in the gospel. So I think Ernest's project there is very worthwhile. We've got a couple of viewers, and look, if you just toggle around, move your mouse, hover it around the top of the screen. You can turn the Q&A chat on and ask a question, but we are running out of time. We've got to 7:40 and I never take it past 7:45. So if you're going to ask a question, now's your golden opportunity because very soon we'll be drawing it to a close. I'd just like to offer this comment too. First of all, thank you very much for Dorothy and Ernest and Christine for coming in. I put out the statistics every couple of weeks for how our recorded version of the live hangout is doing. And the one that I mentioned, movies as a form of Christian communication, well, Stuart McAdam did a little bit of advertising promotion work with that on the Cinema Addicts website, and I think that's about 1,300 views now. And it gets watched for about 17 minutes of the 40 minutes, and then we know from other analytics that people come back in and finish, pick up where they had stopped watching the last time. And most of our live on-air recordings are getting a minimum of 25 looks or views later on, and some of them, like the first one that I did with Stuart Mannon's, the Somi ones, there's about 40 views there. The second one that I did with Stuart Mannon's on preaching and leading worship for the 21st century, that's well over 120 or 130 views now. So even though we don't have a lot of people actually watching at the time we're broadcasting, we do get quite a follow-up later on. And I haven't done it yet, but YouTube offers the opportunity. I could take the videos that, because everything's being recorded as we speak, as you know, I can then edit that and cut it up into much smaller chunks. So if people use that chat pod, they can have their question directly answered, and it can become a 3 or 4 minute video as opposed to a 40 or 45 minute video. So I haven't seen any questions flow through there yet, so I think we're probably at the time where we should draw tonight's edition to a close. And I wondered if either of you, or both of you, in fact, had any comments that you'd like to make to draw our program to its finish.
I intend to PDF as much of it as I can, and I'll send it through to you, David, so you can see if there is a way of putting it up on Six Senses as a sample.
Yep, that'd be great. Six Senses is starting to get used for more and more interesting creative activities. Philip Garside's latest song with music, Joan O'Connor's paintings, Lavinia Elder and myself had a recent conversation. We're going to use some of the new Jung material that I'm putting out in video form, and we'll be coming back to people that have done practical theological reflection with us, and we will actually start making a real resource that can be used in a parish in a book kind of form. So as children's resources come through, yeah, I think there's every opportunity of putting them into a highly attractive package, Dorothy, and very happy to do that, and maybe we publish out to Google Books as a freebie resource.
Yeah.
Christine,
any final comments from you?
I really like to follow very closely what Dorothy and Ernest are putting together, with the idea of getting it into our families who have grandchildren, who we may only see 2 or 3 times a year. I think that would be a good starting point.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I do too. I actually think that their idea has got potential up and down congregations everywhere in New Zealand. It's a great idea. But also, I know I'm a member at Trinity-at-Waiake, but all the initiative in getting that program and getting our church members, our elderly church members out into primary schools assisting with reading, I think was a spectacular initiative for a local parish. It went one step beyond, if I can put it this way, one step beyond Bible in schools. It actually just tackled a much bigger problem. So all credit to Christine Baker for that fantastic outreach. All credit to Ernest and Dorothy down there in Riverton. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for being in, and I'll draw this edition of Live on Air to a close and hope to see you next week. Next week's edition has got the Reverend Dr. George Armstrong, Jim Pearson, myself, one or two others in there, and we're talking about a theology of resistance, where we take theology to the marketplace and make the Christian faith just that little bit sharper in its edge. Thanks indeed. See you next time.